All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the HODLcast. Today we have very special guest and crypto celebrity, an amazing podcaster and actress and actually a phenomenal singer as well, and the host of many crypto conferences, Naomi Brockwell. So, Naomi, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with us today.
Of course, anything for you, Sasha. One of my all-time favorite people, wealth of knowledge on so many areas. So I'm delighted to be here.
Oh, well, thank you. And maybe we can just start. You can give us a little bit. We're going to talk mostly about the Snowden book today, but maybe you can give us a little background on yourself and how you actually got involved with crypto way back a long time ago now.
Yeah, I mean, it started out for me as this fascination with monetary policy, sort of really into economics. And then when I discovered Bitcoin, I just seen so many issues with the central banking system, the Federal Reserve. And so Bitcoin for me just represented so much hope, and it still does. And I think that like so many of the ills of society can be mitigated by taking back control of the money supply, because there's so much corruption that gets funded because of this central banking system that we have right now. And the individual is always like at the bottom of the food chain. They tend to get screwed over and over again. Am I allowed to say that on my show?
Oh yeah, you can say it.
And I just feel like allowing people the opportunity to transact online, transact in the digital world, but still be their own bank and not have to ask people permission to spend their own funds, I just thought was tremendously important. So that's what really got me into this. So this was a while ago. And then I started making videos about Bitcoin in like 2013 to try to educate people and say, hey guys, there's this new thing. It's kind of esoteric and fringe and weird, and you probably won't understand it. But my ultimate aim was just to try to introduce new audiences to it and say, this is something you should be paying attention to. Because if what I understand about this is correct, then this could change everything. Like, we've figured out how to make digital assets that are unique. And from that, I mean, there are so many consequences of that. So many areas where this decentralization of trust could be applied. And obviously the killer app is currency. So that's, it just got me super excited. And so I've kind of been in this realm ever since. But since then, actually, so my show's kind of pivoted recently. Before, I was just focused on blockchain tech for years. And recently, because of Snowden, inspired by all the stuff that he's done, I'm going more and more down a privacy track. Like, I used to think just take back control of the money supply and we're good, but it's so much deeper than that. And now I think that we need equal measures of taking back control of money and mitigating all of the tremendous overreach of the surveillance state that we have currently. I think that teaching people not only how to be their own bank, but also how to maintain their privacy in this digital world is just so important.
Yeah, I recently listened to your video on coin joins, and it's a topic, I've heard lots about it. Oh, you should use coin joins, but I had no idea really how to do it, and you broke it down very nicely. So I recommend.
I'm glad you watched that. I think that's so important. Like, everyone talks about Bitcoin, and now that people understand it better, you hear less of this rhetoric, but people still think about it as if it's this untraceable money, as if it's this private money. It's absolutely not. It's a pseudonymous network. So your privacy is only as good as the distance between your pseudonym and your real identity is. And that can so easily be broken. And I think that people need to be aware of that. Because, I mean, as long as the government has a monopoly on the use of force, it doesn't matter whether this is uncensorable money, they can still target you as an individual. So I just think that protecting yourselves in all areas and taking back control of your own lives is just a really important tool that I hope that more people will start to get interested in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's so important for, I don't mean to get off topic, but,
No.
the Hong Kong news came out that they're going heavy into blockchain and stuff. And it's kind of scary because this technology, which was really created, I think, for, to allow people to transact, privately and autonomously, it can be used as a huge, huge surveillance method if people don't embrace things like coin joins and and using, non-KYC wallet providers and things like that. So it's
absolutely, it's a double-edged sword there. And I mean, the technology itself is neutral. It's not good or it's not bad. It's just this neutral tech. And originally, really, it's about taking back control of money. It was about creating something that the government couldn't shut down. And that was really central to it, because we've had digital currencies exist before. Bitcoin wasn't the first one. There have been lots of iterations, but the problem is that they've all been centralized, or mainly centralized. And because of that, they can easily be shut down. And we know the government doesn't like competition in things that they have a monopoly over. So they were just shut down by government. The government doesn't want competing currencies because they're debasing the US dollar all the time. That every country is just participating in these terrible schemes where the individual loses out at the end of the day. And so that's why they didn't want competing currencies, because if you had a choice between a currency that can't be debased and one that is not only constantly debased, but exists in a state of perpetual institutionalized debasement, like the fact that the US dollar has lost 98% of its value in the last 100 years, is just insane. So if you have a choice of currencies, why would you keep using the one that keeps losing value, whereas Bitcoin can't be debased. There will only ever be 21 million. So I think that Bitcoin really, when it was created, it was this tool where they created the first decentralized currency, and that was just tremendously important because it's uncensorable, it can't be shut down, and that's kind of the key essence of why Bitcoin is just so important there. So now looking at Hong Kong, I mean, I think blockchain tech is super helpful for the people there. They're currently trying to use cash as much as possible because they understand the surveillance apparatus that exists within the financial infrastructure, where your activities can all be traced according to where you've swiped your credit card, where you've used Venmo or Facebook Cash or whatever it is that you're using. And I think that, as you mentioned, on the other side of things, and as we mentioned before, Bitcoin isn't private. And blockchain tech is, Bitcoin is this open ledger, right? And it's this very transparent ledger of all transactions that have taken place. And as I explained in the CoinJoin video, it's just really easy to figure out where money has come from, where it's going to, and just trace back all of an individual's financial activities. And so governments, obviously, they would love to have something like that. Now, the good thing about Bitcoin is that you can layer privacy systems on top of that. And I think that we all need to be doing a lot more of that, but we also need to be protecting our privacy in general, and trying to decouple ourselves from all of the online activity that we have. And that's a tremendously hard thing to do. It's really difficult, but I think we need to at least start the conversation about this and start to teach people tools, little simple things, little changes. Like, you don't need to throw out your smartphone immediately, but how about just turning off Wi-Fi, or just turning off Wi-Fi when you're not using it, so it doesn't send out probe requests all the time. So little things like that, I think people need to learn about so that they can just start to take back control in different areas.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so I guess let's get into a little bit about Snowden's book. And that, I watched the movie a few years ago when it came out, and that was my first really big shock, putting the tape over the cameras on it.
Right.
Yeah. But what were your impressions of the book?
Well, I had so many takeaways. Like, look, this is what my book looks like. Look how he's posted it. It's so ridiculous. I read it and was just really, I mean, I've been following the Snowden revelations closely, and well, I thought I was following it closely, but this was an eye-opener for me. And first part, what I loved is that a lot of people will be reading this book and being introduced to these ideas for the first time. And that just made me so happy that he is this platform that can expose people to these really important issues that they may have just like swept aside because it's not convenient, or they just don't have the time to deal with. And I understand that. We're all just trying to live our lives and pay our bills and give time to our families, and so a lot of this stuff can just be pushed back as not a priority. And I think that he just did a tremendous job of laying out why you need to be concerned about this, not just for your sake but for your children's sake. Are you the type of person that is putting tremendous amount of information about them on the internet that's going to be there for forever? So he kind of talks about the evolution of the internet. And I just found it such a fascinating conversation, because we start to, like, everything that happens like becomes normalized in society, and there's so much happening right now that has become normalized. But when you go back to how the internet first started out, you're like, whoa, these are worlds apart. So that struck me. And then the other thing that really struck me was just the extent of what is happening that I don't think I realized. Like, where he breaks down stellar wind, where he talks about, you know, turbine and turmoil and all of these different things that go on, like what is it, X key score, and we can talk in detail about what all these things are. But when I read about that, I just kind of took a step back and took a deep breath and got a little bit paranoid, but in a good way, because it made me focus on trying to teach people tools about privacy. So
Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's pretty heavy stuff. And what has the U.S. government thought of the book? Are you food and stuff? Have you been
oh,
following?
they love it. They think it's so good. They're like, thanks, Snowden, for spreading our message. Well, the day that it was released, obviously, you know, we've all heard that they immediately sued the publisher. And that's fascinating. They sued the publisher for printing a book that shared information about what the government was doing. And that's the thing that's become normalized as well. And it's become normalized really since September 11, and Snowden goes into explaining how that came to be. But, you know, when you have, you know, big disasters or tragedies, it's amazing how awful people can be in taking, you know, the opportunism that occurs with people who are very self-serving and power hungry. Just take that as an opportunity to try and sneak in things that will give them more power, and they leverage people's fear in order to do that. And it's amazing what got passed and what's still being passed today, all the laws and the little loopholes and different things, like the argument. And he breaks it, like, he just does such a good job at looking at all the different areas of society that just are so rotten to the core. And the way he kind of talks about these processes, and when people say, oh, well, you know, you voted for them, therefore you do get a say in what's going on. And he kind of debunks that, and he says, well, no, because if you got a say, then you would know about programs, you would get to vote on programs. If these things are in the public's best interest, like if mass surveillance isn't the public's best interest, great, surely the public is smart enough to vote for it then, and like just lay out the facts for them. Just say, okay, this is why we need to do it. These are all the ways that it could help. Let people vote. But instead, they do so many things that just like a handful of super high up officials know about. They layer it in all of this secrecy and, like, you know, hidden hearings and all of this stuff. And so this pretense that we're living in a society where we get a say about what's going on because we get to vote for one of two parties is kind of insane. And we need to stop thinking that way, because there's a lot going on in our society that we have no say in, and it's not in our best interest. And we need to be pushing back. But how can we push back about things that we don't know about?
Mm-hmm.
You know, ACLU tried to push back against like mass surveillance before, and when they went to court, you know, the government said, well, if a program like this existed, it would be top secret. We're not saying it does exist, but if it exists, it will be top secret, and it would be in the public's best interest. But also, because you can't prove it, because we can't give you information about it, then we are just going to dismiss your case anyway. So even the organizations that get a hint of, I think this is going on, there's nothing they can do about it, and the courts just kick these things out.
Yeah, and well, the courts can't even get information to understand it, and any if they had a jury on it, who's to say they wouldn't place their own people on the jury, something like that too. So, but yeah, the information just isn't there to even look at, which is what's so scary about it. So what was he charged with initially? Like, can you give us a little background on for anyone?
Well, I mean, he's basically charged with, so people get angry at him because he like swore an oath. And he talks about this a lot in his interviews and in his book about how, you know, he used to work for the government and now he works for the people. And we need to differentiate between what's in the state's best interest and what's in the nation's best interest, or what's in the state's best interest and what's in the country's best interest, or the population itself's best interest. They're two very different things. And he really, you know, lays that out really nicely in the book. And how he says that, you know, when he swore an oath, it was to serve his country. It wasn't to serve the deep state. It wasn't to serve the people who are in power. And he's not just, you know, a blind, like people say that loyalty is this great thing. It's like, well, loyalty, if it's loyalty to something good, I'm sorry, but loyalty, if you're standing by policies that are hurting people, that are destructive, that are ruining people's lives, that are invasive, that take away freedom, I mean, that's not loyalty that you want. And so he says that his oath was actually to serving his country, and these programs were not in the best interest of his country. Now, what we have right now is this systematic attack against journalists, and we're actually seeing that all over the world. It's not just in America. I mean, and it's not just Snowden. You've got Assange being dealt with at the moment, this US extradition order, where, again, he's charged with aiding and abetting, like they call it espionage, this idea that...
For Chelsea Manning is for that one.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the thing is, they don't differentiate between someone selling information to a hostile nation and someone giving information to the press or to the people of their own country if they think it's in their best interest. And what happens, like the reason, I mean, he said he would come back if he thought he would have a fair trial. But the issue, and actually I think his name's Daniel Hayes, actually was in the middle of a hearing at the moment where these people, like, they're not allowed to tell the jury why they're doing these things. They it's like a black and white case that they charge you with, you know. Did you release information? Well, I mean, it's very clear. He definitely released this information, but they're not allowed to explain why they did it, whether it was in the country's best interest, whether what the government was doing was illegal. We've since had court cases against a lot of these programs, and they've been found to be illegal. So Snowden uncovered these things that were illegal, yet he's charged with espionage for doing so. And the juries aren't allowed to make any judgment on whether they think what he did was morally right or wrong. They just have to look at the fact, did he or did he not give away information? And that sort of thing is just, I mean, it's absolutely a disaster for anyone who is a whistleblower who actually is going to uncover corruption in the government. You want people to be able to come forward safely if they think there are bad things going on, because that's the only way that a country can function well. Otherwise, you just get these layers of corruption building up, and even good people who know about it don't come forward because they're persecuted. You know, Snowden's burnt his life to the ground essentially by coming forward. He left everything. He was in a high-paying job in Hawaii at the time, and now he's in exile in Russia, and can never come back home to see his family. And, you know, there's so much he sacrificed for doing this, and it takes a very strong person to make that kind of a sacrifice. And you shouldn't expect people to do that, you know. Instead, we should have protections in place for whistleblowers. And at the moment, the protections we supposedly have in place are actually used to the whistleblower's detriment, and it's just a tragedy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on his recent interview with Joe Rogan, he gave and I think it's more detailed in the book, but he gave a really interesting account of how the surveillance started. So it started after 9/11, I think, at the, request of Dick Cheney through President Bush, one letter to all the phone companies saying, you've got to give us this information so we can catch the terrorists. And if you don't, there's going to be blood on your hands. And it wasn't actually allowed at the time for the phone companies to share that information, but they did it anyway. And then I think it was, maybe the New York Times or someone was about to publish an article in 2004 that shed a lot of light on it. And again, the President Bush sent them a letter saying, there's going to be blood on your hands if you share this information. It's got to be kept private. And so they waited until after the election in 2005 to share it. And then the phone companies said, we're not we're opting out now unless you make this retroactive law that what we did was okay and we can continue doing it. And yeah, it's very scary.
Yeah, like it's so funny that they're on the brink of this revelation about, oh, there's this surveillance state and all of this. And instead of saying, oh, okay, well, this is going to fix it, what that actually did, as you said, was make them more worried because they knew this would be open. They needed a way to justify it. And so it actually further entrenched the laws. Now, as you mentioned, not only is this surveillance persisting, or was persisting, well, probably still is, let's be honest, that everyone got immunity. All of the phone companies who broke the law, and everyone, like the people with blood on their hands, they should have been outed. There should have been accountability, but instead they were given immunity, and it further entrenched the policy, and that meant that they could just continue it from now on, and it was actually legal from then on. Like it was it was safe for them to do it because they had an immunity for it, I should say. So it's just this absolutely terrible system that's set up. And I feel like he goes into this in the book as well, just how the system is intentionally broken in this way. It's all about people maintaining power in different areas. And I mean, something's got to give, right? It's, and I think that honestly, I'm not sure how much hope I have on the political process changing these things. But I do think individuals need to make more conscious choices in their lives. Like right now, I think that we're tech crazy, and I love tech. I love gadgets and I love cool things, and I'm definitely not a Luddite who thinks that we should all throw out all of our smartware. But at the same time, we need to be making active choices, and we say, well, perhaps not all tech is good. We need to look at our lives and what we want to allow in our lives, and maybe use technology that is privacy enhancing rather than the smart fridges that literally just, what are they good for? Here's automatically ordering your milk from Amazon so you don't have to worry about it. Is that really a gain that you want in your life, when the consequences of that is that you have this machine watching everything that you do? You're paying for the privilege of this smart device, of all of these extra features on there, when in fact the only people who gain from that are the companies, because they just take that data, they package it, and then they sell it. That's all of your data, but you're paying for the privilege. So things like that, we need to be making smarter choices in our lives about that stuff.
Mm-hmm. And it's so the way that the companies get to use the data or possibly use it against us without any search and seizure rules. Like the Fourth Amendment, it says, they're supposed to have probable cause and a warrant before searching any of our personal effects. But I think it was Snowden explained it was a case from the 70s where the third-party doctrine was created. So we don't own our data. The tech company the phone company owns all those records. So if they want to willingly give it over without a warrant, it's theirs to give. So I think that's what, one simple change. And I think the GDPR kind of, in Europe, they tried to, it's a first attempt at something like this to let people take back control of their data. But something like that, I think, over time, people are going to, the more cases where people end up in jail or prosecuted based on this data that was collected that really wasn't, shouldn't have been collected. It's not like they did anything suspicious, but then if the government wants something on them at a later time, they can just search back through, like he was saying, every search, engine, everywhere you've ever been, yeah,
that's craziness. Like, I mean, and in my head, I was thinking like, well, how easy to sort through this data is it really? Because I was like I shouldn't worry about this, because this bit of data from here and this bit of data from here, like they would have to piece that all together, And he just really explained how easy it is. Like you think how easy a Google search engine is. The fact that you can type in anything and immediately get all these results that also kind of predict your behavior and can tell you exactly what you want to find. Like Google is amazing for their search engine. And then they created a search engine for the government called X-Keyscore that literally is like a Google search, but for everything private you've ever done. So they'll just type in something about you, whether it's like an IP address or a phone number or your name or a keyboard, whatever. and it pulls up all your private records, every email you've sent, every phone call you've made, everything that Alexa is hearing and translating immediately into into words, and then they're storing the data there. Like, I mean, it's the NSA's goal is permanent data storage, and that's why Snowden's book is Permanent Record, because I don't think we realize that everything is accumulated about us, and it is this permanent record. How much stuff do we want kept in this permanent record? You know, do we want an Alexa in our bedroom that is recording sound bites of everything, that is picking up all about, like Snowden lays it out, says like it's picking up our fetishes and our kinks, and that's all data that's being used, and that's all associated with our identity. We can't pretend that this is just data that's out there and it's anonymous. None of it's anonymous. This is all linked to your IP address. This is all linked to your identity. This is all linked to the MAC address in your devices. This is, you know, linked to your cell reception. This is, I mean, of course it's not anonymous, and all of this data is immediately associated with us, and it's easily searchable, and it's there forever. And that's a tremendous tool for leverage if the government ever wants it. And you can think, well, I don't plan on doing anything illegal. And, you know, that's not the issue there. First of all, there are people in society we need to protect who, you know, are persecuted by the government, whether they've done something bad or not. And second of all, we need to be protecting this stuff, because the government at the end of the day is made up of a bunch of people, and they have access to this. Like, one of the chilling things that he mentions was when he walks into this office, and these people just working there in the NSA is just this regular thing where they'll just find nudes, you know, photos that have been sent around on the internet, and they share them. They'll be like, oh, bonus, I found this selfie, it's a naked chick, and they just share this stuff with each other, and it becomes like this, you know, tool for commerce almost. You know, it's just shared all around the offices. You think about every like dodgy photo you might have ever taken in your life. You know, maybe it's just an ugly photo, maybe it's a picture of something you shouldn't have taken a picture, whatever. All of that stuff is associated with you and easily searchable. And it's not just there in case they want to get something on you. It's also shared amongst employees, and they're actively sharing these things. This is a normal habit there. This, I mean, that's terrifying and awful. And the problem, like one of the things he said, like that's part of the system that's so wrong about this and the way that it's broken, is that there's no accountability for people sharing this stuff. Like, you know, these employees, obviously they're not allowed to do this, but in order to prosecute someone, they have to admit that they are doing this, which means they have to admit that they had access to this data in the first place, and that's illegal. And so nothing ever gets done. There's no oversight, there's no accountability. And so it's just a terribly broken system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I hate that argument. And I sometimes have it too, of like, well, what are they going to find on me? You know, I'm not breaking any major laws or anything like that. But then you think about it, what if something happens in the future? Then they just shouldn't have access to all. Like,
what if they want to?
However they want to spin anything, now they can find some, you know, it's just too much. But
yeah, absolutely. Like, what if they decide to make Bitcoin illegal, and then they, well, we're going to make an example of the people who supported it. You know, Sasha, she was an advocate. Let's show what can happen. You know, take her down. I mean, they say that we commit like 7 felonies a day that we don't even know about, because the law books just get bigger and bigger, and they very, very rarely, if ever, take away laws. So we're all doing things that are illegal. It's just the severity that happens. But not only that, I mean, they're taking private conversations, things that we expect were happening in the privacy of our own home or whatever, stuff like that. I mean, it's just not a good way to have a society. This is the Orwellian nightmare we all read about. This is 1984, except things aren't gritty and, you know, Soviet era architecture and chaos, and it's nothing like that. It's shiny
as a society, embracing and saying, yes, like, give me more of this technology. Yeah, I don't mind I like the convenience more than I just like the fact that you're collecting the information.
Yeah, it's all shiny and it's all interesting, and they're filled with distraction, and it's all gamified, and they figured it out how to, as you said, give over this stuff willingly. And we need to take a step back and just kind of reassess what we're doing here, because we're paving the way. Like right now it's all shiny, but the tools that we've put in their hands, this giant system that Amazon has built for the NSA that is storing a permanent record of everything we've ever done. I mean, okay, so imagine that the worst possible person you can think of as president. Maybe you think it's Trump, maybe there's someone like terrible that's nothing like Trump, whatever. Imagine the worst person in power. Imagine now that person's gotten into power and they have access to all of this. Like, it's all fun and games if your guy's in power and you like him, but these are resources that we're setting up that future generations are going to have to deal with as well. And I mean, we're paving the way to this tremendously terrifying totalitarian surveillance state. And I feel like we're already there, but it can get even worse.
Mm-hmm. And it's so contrary to how before the internet, like when they were developing all the boundaries of where the Fourth Amendment, where the protection ended, it's like they had certain cases where people were flying over people's backyards and seeing weed and, weed trees growing or something. And then they said, oh, well, they own their own airspace, so you shouldn't have been there for that long. Or if they're coming up to your porch and having a dog, like a dog smelling, and they're saying, the court was saying, no, like there was no reason to have a dog there sniffing around someone's house. Like, they had all these really, I think, pretty good boundaries in place. If someone was hiding their backyard and put a roof on it, then you can't look in there unless you have some kind of probable cause. And now it's like, whoa, okay, we don't need any boundary. They're right in our bathroom with us, on our phone, watching us, do it, whatever. Like, and like you said, like in the bathroom and all of it. So, and even with these watches too, collecting our heart rate. So if, technically, like, say someone was doing a crime, and running from the crime scene, their heart rate is going to go up, and that data is all, there. It's just so much, it's different than in the 70s or 80s or early 90s. Like, people could really, do whatever they want a lot more. Now all the roads, especially here in DC, everything is red light cameras, speeding enforced by cameras, and you really, you feel like you're watched all the time here.
Absolutely.
School zone limit, or you get a ticket, or
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and you're talking about all of this bad stuff that could happen. I mean, this technology is also fantastic. So think about like a smartwatch. And there was recently, like I think last month, there was a guy who had an accident on his bike, and the Apple Watch actually registered that he didn't get up after his fall and called 911. And an ambulance came and picked him up. It was the ambulance that called 911 on his behalf, put him to hospital. They said that he would have died had that not happened. So there's tremendous benefit to all of this technology. But, what is Apple doing with the rest of that data? We need to be having this conversation. It doesn't mean throwing out all of this awesome tech. It doesn't mean getting rid of your watch, but we need to get conscious of this and start having this conversation as a society and start pushing back against the overreach of this data collection. If you want to opt in to having 911 be called when you have an accident, that should be something that's you can isolate. It shouldn't mean that you are then agreeing to have your entire life under surveillance and just watched and monitored and tracked because you want the positive externalities. We need to get to a point now where people are concerned enough about their privacy that they push back against companies and make it very clear what they want, and against governments, because at the end of the day, a lot of the time, let's be honest, like Facebook, Apple, Google, they don't give this stuff over willingly. Sometimes they do, but a lot of the case they push back. Like, you look at what happened after the Snowden revelations happened. Before, a very small part of the internet was encrypted, and immediately after, you had Facebook, Apple, Google, they all made encryption a default. Now 80% of our internet traffic is encrypted. So they were concerned about this. They didn't want to have the government intercepting this stuff, because sometimes the way it happens is sometimes the government will go to them directly and say, we want this, we're subpoenaing you, we are taking this information. But a lot of the times it's done without their knowledge. They bypass them directly. They go straight to the internet companies, the internet providers. And so the fact, like Google and Facebook and Apple, they all kind of discovered this at the same time. And that's why they've made encryption this default. So it can't just be passively taken. So, sometimes these companies don't want to just hand this stuff over. So it is the government at the end of the day that we need to be pressuring. We need to be saying, no, this data is ours. Let's change the laws to reflect that. We live in a digital age now. Most of our lives is on the internet. And you guys reach right in there. You reach into all of our private lives, you know. We fought wars over this in the past. This should now still pertain. Just because we're in the digital age, it shouldn't be any different.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then, so I think in 2015, Congress passed the USA Freedom of Information Act, which is supposed to, prohibit the mass collection of phone records. Do you think that's, what do you make of that? Or,
I mean, in the past, you look at what they've done to dodge some of the repercussions of these things, where they've just changed, different wording or different definitions of what things mean so that they can keep going with all of their data collection, but get away with it. So I think that they're going to keep trying to get away with this stuff, and it's just going to be as hard as ever to get anywhere. Like these organizations have such a tremendous amount of power. It's really chilling, and they routinely shut down journalists. They're trying to extradite Edward Snowden, Julian Assange. Like all of these people are under threat at the moment. Journalists are targeted. Governments want to really put a dampener on how much information is allowed to flow freely. So it's very clear that they want to maintain this control, and they want to make an example of whistleblowers and journalists who reveal this information. They're quite happy collecting all of this stuff. They want to maintain their position of power.
Mm-hmm. And he mentioned that they were really lining the pockets of people that were helping them, keep it all under wraps. And I had seen in one of my Telegram chats, someone was saying Nancy Pelosi's net worth was $238 million, and it was a Twitter post. I don't know. I haven't verified it. I just saw it on Twitter, but.
Well, I've seen Snowden push back against, he's mentioned her name quite a few times, and then afterwards kind of brushed it aside and said, she's just one example, but he's brought it up enough times that I'm wondering, okay, clearly he doesn't want to target her, too much and just come out and say it. But he clearly knows a lot about what's going on. He probably has all the information about what was going on there and who was involved, and it's very clear that she was.
Yeah, and so if her salary was $223,000 max salary since 1987, so there's no.
Did she just buy a lot of Bitcoin? Is that how she made that money?
Yeah, good question. But what I was thinking, maybe you have some insight into this, but why haven't? So if he's such an enemy to the state, why are they allowing him just to live in Russia? Couldn't they send some covert, it's not like he's walking around with a bodyguard, so big bad America can go get him and bring him to jail by force if they wanted to, but it must be because he's got all that information on all these people that they're kind of just, I don't know, that's my guess.
Well, I mean, I think it's the same reason why hasn't Russia gone after him or taken him into custody or tried to extract some of this information. And I think it's just because there are a lot of eyes on them right now. And, these people at the end of the day, they're politicians who want to get elected. So they're probably not going to spearhead things like this because too many eyes on them. But also there's a lot of eyes on the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, all of these agencies, because he's just revealed what corruption there is rife within these organizations. So the fact that there's so much, I mean, if someone were to go after Snowden, I think that may even lead to a giant protest movement. I wouldn't be surprised, but then again, maybe I would be surprised because I'm surprised that we've kind of forgotten about Assange. I would have thought that we'd be up in arms about this. But I find very few major mainstream media outlets talking about him anymore. People have a very short attention span, and that makes me so sad. I think that his case is really just the central point that highlights all the corruption in this and the targeting of journalists right now. And freedom of the press is something we absolutely need to be putting all energy into protecting right now.
Mm-hmm. I think it's one of these things when it has to get bad enough to every individual. It it's just a far away thing. Oh, it happened to him. Well, he shared information, but my life's okay. I'm not feeling this. Or I have so much debt and kids and job, and I don't have time to investigate this or protest. So but I think it is going to, I don't, obviously no one knows, but it's going to come to a head eventually. The more boundaries that get crossed, and the more people feel it.
That might not even be to our benefit though. Like, you look at all of the worst dictators in history and how they came to power. It was when things were really, really shit. It was when they, and someone came in and offered a solution and said, hey, these are the people that are hurting you. I will come in and I will fix all of this, and just give me all the power to do so. And people fall for that because they don't like what's going on. I think there's going to be a giant economic collapse soon, and everyone is like, yay, Bitcoin's going to be awesome then. I don't know. I think it's going to be a just giant societal collapse, and people are going to be angry, and people are easily manipulated, and someone will just need to point the finger and say, like, these are the people who are causing all of this. Let's just go after them. And it's just going to lead to opportunists coming in and feeling the power vacuum, and worse people come into play. Like, I think as a society, we need to start changing our individual behavior. We need to start making more self-aware, conscious decisions in our lives, making sure that we're taking steps that are easy to take. Honestly, they're easy, they're small, but they're conscious, to protect our own privacy, and start getting this conversation going. Make it normalized. Like, there are lots of ways that we're swayed in society, and movements have erupted, and you're like, whoa, this kind of grew. Let's create a movement about being privacy aware and wanting to protect that privacy and get that back into the culture. Like, this is something that's valuable. Just because we're posting every breakfast we've ever created on Instagram, and we've lost this sense of what it means to have a private action in this social media internet filled world.
Maybe some memes like what you described earlier, them at the NSA looking at all the naked lady photos. People might kind of raise
Absolutely. I just think we need to get this into our culture. This needs to be the next movement, because we're fighting this battle right now. The government is going after encryption. They've broken most forms of encryption at this stage. There are a few that we think they haven't broken, and we can presume they aren't broken because now the government's trying to ban them. The fact that the Australian government is basically banned end-to-end encryption at this stage, and the White House is talking about it. They do not want our conversations. Yeah, they don't want our online activity to be private, and they want to get rid of encryption. And I don't see people up in arms about this. I don't see people getting angry. We need to change the culture. We need to get people angry about this. We need to tell them this is something that is worth protecting. If we lose privacy on the internet, we've lost all privacy in our lives, and we need to realize that, and we need to be fighting really hard to make sure this doesn't happen.
I agree. Yeah. A tall order though.
Yeah.
Well, so what are some takeaways? So you said, maybe turning off the Wi-Fi on the phones. Was there anything else people
Oh gosh, there's so much. I mean, just learning about this stuff. One of the main points he says is that, technology these days controls us. And I know that this kind of sounds cliche, like, oh, you control your technology or it'll control you, control your social media habit or it'll control you. But it's important, because our technological ignorance these days is being taken full advantage of. And he talks about how this has, this hold over us, the fact that we don't understand what's going on inside our phones, the fact that we have no idea what apps are being activated at any given time. Even when you turn your phone off, we have no way of knowing what things are still running, whether the microphones are still going, like what's happening there. It's a completely opaque system by design. Now, Snowden actually... Yeah, what?
Blackberries, you could easily just pop the battery out. It would be nice if you could do that on these phones too, because then at night, it would completely stop the ability to record or whatever. Yeah, if you wanted to have a private conversation. I mean, who's to say the phone isn't the only recording device near you though? Your laptops, like it's just so many, your TVs, like everything nowadays.
Yeah, well, he actually wrote a paper in 2016 with, it was like Bunny is his name, but let me find his actual name, where it just goes in depth. So Bunny Huang, and I think his actual name might be Andrew or something. And they go into Snowden and him put together this paper about how to create a device. He calls it the silent phone, like what extent you need to go to actually deactivate all of the things that are constantly transmitting information that could track you. Now, this is absolutely important for journalists in particular, and they're under threat. And they say that, you know, every year like over 1,000 journalists die, and that's a very conservative estimate of that. And they die because of, you know, stories that they're creating, etc. And that's just the data that we have. So that's terrifying in itself. So they're looking to create these products where you can have physical switches for your Wi-Fi to turn it off. Make sure the power literally doesn't get to whatever's controlling the Wi-Fi so that it can't be activated. Same with microphones, things like that. So they've designed this product. They're also looking at designing, you know, these add-ons that can be added to phones. From what I've researched, they haven't come out with anything. They've just gotten like a prototype working, but they haven't come out with any consumer products. But I'm excited about that, you know. So in the meantime, things you can do: turn off your Wi-Fi when you're not using it, because there are these things called probe requests, which literally, like every internet connection you've ever made in your life, your phone stores those, and you probably don't realize. And that's why when you show up at your friend's house, it automatically connects to their Wi-Fi, because it's in the memory. It's just a default. Unless you actively say, do not remember this, then it will remember it and connect. Now, why is that dangerous? It's because at any given time, your phone, like at all times, is sending out these probe requests saying, okay, is Robert's Wi-Fi in range? Is work Wi-Fi in range? Is home Wi-Fi in range? Is my favorite coffee shop Wi-Fi in range? It's just sending out those requests, because that's how we get this very seamless, smooth internet connection on our phone that just kind of it immediately connects wherever we are. Because phone companies, they really are trying to outsource as much of our data to Wi-Fi as possible. And so they have these systems that just constantly ping. Now, what does that mean? That means that this stuff is being transmitted very accessibly by anyone who wants to get access to it, that also has our device ID attached to it. So if you can figure out someone's device ID by looking at their network names, knowing what location they were in at any given time, all of this stuff is publicly available information. You can literally track people. You can find out where they live and where they work, and you can find out patterns of movement. Like, this is a huge security threat you need to be aware of. So first thing, like, go through your Wi-Fi remembered passwords, like forget all of them, forget every network that has ever been connected to, so that you're not constantly saying, hey guys, because you've got to realize that's a uniquely identifiable thing. If you see that someone is sending out these 5 internet requests here, and then those same 5 internet requests are seen over there and there, you can trace a person's movements by all of this. So turn that off. Turn off Bluetooth when you're not using it as well. Go through into your settings, forget every network that you don't use, because otherwise that's going to be constantly sending out those probe requests too. Financial data, start to take that away from the banks and the companies that are selling that, because that's hugely valuable data that is being repackaged and sold. Use cash wherever possible. That's a step that is easy. You're probably going to carry around some form of a wallet everywhere, so just keep it filled with cash. And try to use that as much as possible. Or if you're making digital payments online, use cryptocurrency wherever you can for making purchases. It's so important to take that information away from the banks and the people who would use that information to track our movements and our data and all of that. So start to take that information back. Snowden said, when you're using your phone even, connected with an Ethernet cable, don't have Wi-Fi in your house. Now, why does he say that? It's interesting. Like, he also talks about
how to connect an Ethernet cable to the phone, though.
I don't have it in my room at the moment. You just get little adapters, and I didn't even know they existed till Snowden was like, hey guys, these are my tips for a more privacy conscious phone. Connect via Ethernet. And I was like, my phone? Have a phone that is plugged in with a cord to the wall? That's so 1990s. Like, why would I want to do that? But I've been using it, and honestly, it hasn't made my life any worse at all. In fact, it's actually made me more productive, because I'm not constantly checking social media on it anymore. I actually have to go to the location of where my phone is. And also, like, when I'm in the house, my phone's usually plugged in to charge the battery anyway, right? And so just attaching that Ethernet cord while it's sitting there is no big deal at all. So he says to do that, and I made a whole video on why that's important, basically because there are these publicly available maps of every Wi-Fi access point in existence. That means if you've ever turned your phone into a hotspot, that's publicly available information. It tells you where you were. It gives away all kinds of information about you. And sites like wiggle.net are amazing in highlighting this problem. They've created a map just with publicly available information, which isn't even the half of what Apple and Google are collecting. It just highlights what information is available and public and out there, and what kind of databases are being created about your movements. And so you can go in there. It's kind of scary zooming in and seeing your Wi-Fi address and seeing your phone hotspot and seeing the exact location and seeing the time you connected there and seeing whatever devices were connected to that. Like it's terrifying information. But you know,
you said wiggle,
wigle.net. But as I said, this is just one example of a database. There are so many of them out there. You know, so just stop having Wi-Fi around. VPNs are a tricky issue because sometimes they're just honeypots for people to collect your information. Logging issues is, you know, difficult because governments have such power over these companies and can get information from them. You know, it's kind of like a glorified proxy. I think that VPNs are really important. But I do think that, you know, you need other layers of protection because they're not the panacea that people make them out to be. They're not going to make you anonymous. They're not an anonymity tool at all. Your VPN provider has your IP address. They have your identity. Other things that I'd recommend people do, I mean, they're just little changes we make in our lives, like choose not to have a smart appliance. Your fridge probably doesn't need Wi-Fi. Just say no to that. They're making you pay for the privilege twice. You pay for the hardware, and then you're paying because they're selling all of your data and making a huge profit off of that. Do you have an Alexa in your home? Honestly, get rid of your Alexa. Get rid of your Alexa. I know that people like it because they want music around. That thing is listening to you at all times.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I think that they're the creepiest things, and I just be more conscious. You know, there are so many little things we can do. Learning how the tech works is paramount.
Amazon just, you know, they announced they're moving to Virginia. They're moving their headquarters. And then when I was listening to him talking about how entrenched with the government Amazon really is.
Oh, yeah.
It made a lot of sense because I was wondering, I'm like, why of all places Virginia? Because it's, you know, it's fairly expensive here, and they're going to, you know, relocate a lot of employees and stuff. But it sounds like they're just all, you know, working for the government too.
Yeah, no, it's sometimes unwittingly, sometimes very actively. So start making these conscious choices. You don't have to change everything now, but just start to be aware of the things that you're allowing in your life. Be aware that if you have a Nest Cam, Nest is incredibly hackable. Just Google, you know, dark web Nest Cam hacks. You know, there are entire websites dedicated to spying on people's Nest Cams. You know, it's terrifying stuff. So just start to be aware of this stuff and start to protect yourself. Little things like buying a cover for your camera on your phone. That's great, you know, or not carrying your phone around with you everywhere you go so the mic is constantly listening to you. That's also good. Just start turning off the Wi-Fi when you don't need it. Maybe not using Wi-Fi. If you're using public Wi-Fi, make sure you're using a VPN, because at the very least, if it's not the government you're hiding from, because it won't protect you there, but it at least will protect your data from spying eyes who are trying to access, you know, bank details or IDs or passwords or anything you're transmitting on that public Wi-Fi, which makes your device infinitely less secure. So things like that, like there's lots of things we could be taking, choices we could be making in our lives to help improve things. I'm
married to a bit of a privacy nut. Like, he won't go on Wi-Fi anywhere, and I always like it is when we first started hanging out, and I noticed, like, you know, at hotels or anywhere, he's like, oh, I'm not putting my computer, you know, he takes a lot of precautions on it, and I didn't understand exactly how much like, he's explained it to me, and you've explained it beautifully here too, of how much gets shared over these public networks.
Yeah. And it's not just the public networks. So like Wi-Fi is inherently like, it's insecure, it's bad. Like, yeah, I would stay away from that too. If you really need to use it, as I said, use a VPN, but it's also just presume everything on your internet is being recorded in a permanent record. Everything you do. It doesn't even matter. Like if you go to a Google search and you start to type in Sasha, her, and then you're like, oh, actually, I'm not going to search for her. Delete, 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 delete. What you've just started to search for is also recorded. You don't have to have actually hit enter. What happens is it's this stellar wind program that Snowden explains. And there's this program called Turbulence. And Turbulence is made up of two parts, turbine and turmoil. Now what happens, one of those is passive collection. So everything you do on the internet first passes through an NSA server. Don't know if you realize that everything you do passes through an NSA server, but it passes through a server.
Just for Americans or for the...
Well, keep in mind that America, for all intents and purposes, controls 80% of the internet these days, according to Snowden, whether it's through the American companies that government can leverage, whether it's through the infrastructure, who owns the actual, the cables connecting thing, so 80% of it, just presume, is controlled. I would say that almost all of it is accessible by the American government. But so this passes through an NSA server and then goes into passive storage. So that just stuff gets stored forever. That's in a record associated to your identity now. But then what happens when it passes through is it goes through this filter, and this program says, okay, are there any trigger words there? Now, trigger words could be anything. It could be, did you search for VPN? Did you search for the word protest? These seem like innocuous things, but then that triggers something. Then what happens is you go into active data collection, which is the other part of this Turbulence program. What happens in the active data collection is it sends you to a different server, and then depending on your connection, your device type, website you're accessing, all of this, it sorts you through this algorithm and says, okay, we'll use this bit of malware. And so what happens is then attached to your data stream is a little bit of malware that just gets delivered to your computer. And all of this happens, he says, I think it's like 868 milliseconds. So it's like instantaneous. But now that malware is in your computer because you're now in active data collection, and they have access to everything on your device. Everything. And so that's, I mean, you should be cognizant of that every time you're doing anything. Presume that you already have malware on your device and that they are already actively catching everything, which means that your device belongs to them. They can access every single thing on there. And it's, we need to be aware of this. We need to be aware of the overreach. And as I said, like, it could seem overwhelming, like, well, yeah, we're screwed anyway. Let's give up, because how are we going to come back from this? That's why we need to start talking about this stuff, get the conversation going, have people start to push back against this, and also start to encourage people and give them the tools to make better choices in their own lives. Maybe you learn how to have an air gap device, or have something that's far enough removed from your identity. It's not linked to your Gmail account, or you didn't access your Twitter from this device. Maybe start to have private devices that aren't linked to your IP address, that aren't linked to places you habitually go to start to make active choices, because it just seems like it's a steady path downhill from where we are at the moment with the capabilities that governments around the world currently have.
Yeah, it's
and on that note,
yeah. So Naomi, where can people find you?
Yeah, it's like, well, good night, everyone. I'll see you later. But NSA, I'll see you in a few minutes when I open up my phone and I know you're looking straight back at me. So where can people find me? So I have a YouTube show that focuses on blockchain tech and privacy. And sort of the cultural impact of these things. And you can just go to Naomi Brockwell TV. And I'm on Twitter, and I'm on memo.cash, and I'm on minds.com, and I'm on Float, and I'm on all of these different, like library.io, library.com actually now, they switched over. So I try out all of the decentralized media platforms, or the decentralized like currency-based platforms, and some of the non-decentralized ones, but ones that just aren't YouTube. So I'm generally on all of those. If I'm not on there, let me know about it and I'll try it out. But I like to hedge my bets and just make sure that I'm not relying too heavily on one particular part of the infrastructure.
And are you going to any conferences anytime soon?
Oh yeah, so I will be at, when this airs, I will be at Litecoin Summit emceeing that, and then I immediately MC part of the World Crypto Conference. If you're there, come check me out. I believe I'm on the EOS stage there. Then I will be emceeing San Francisco Blockchain Week the next day, so check that out. Also doing interviews, part of a media corner, and then I'll be emceeing the CipherTrace conference, which is all about how traceable Bitcoin is. So hopefully I'll be learning some things there that I can report back to people.
Oh, it sounds like a very busy upcoming couple of weeks, but that's great.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this. Has been very educational for me, and hopefully for everyone that listens. And at least, we're doing a little part to get the conversation going.
Absolutely. Let's keep it going. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
bringing up the topic, Sasha. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. All right. Have a good night.
Bye.